This is the story of Samsung Internet, the unassumingly titled web browser from Samsung. And I'm going to tell the story from my own perspective, starting in the spring of last year, when I had a message on LinkedIn from a recruiter. And I went to press the delete button as usual, but hang on, there's something about this one caught my eye. It said, a major handset manufacturer based near London are looking for a web developer/advocate to support developers building web applications on top of their browser. And I thought, a major handset manufacturer with a web browser? Apple? No, they're probably not hiring in web developer relations in London, right? And Google, Microsoft, well, major handset manufacturer probably wouldn't be the first phrase that you'd use to describe them. So, tentatively, I chose to accept his request to join his professional network so I could find out more about it. And he let me know that the role was at Samsung. Now, at this point, can I ask you all, please, and hopefully you might make me feel a little bit better about my own ignorance at that point, how many of you before this conference and before seeing the conference lineup knew of Samsung's browser? Okay, so that's, okay, would you say a quarter, a third? Thank you, that does make me feel better. Yes, it's called Samsung Internet, which I thought sounded a bit more like an internal business division than an actual web browser, but there we are. So I found out a bit more about it, and I found out that actually it was created back in 2012, and it used to be a version of the stock Android browser, AOSP. Then a year later, the first version came out that was based on Chromium, and that launched with the Samsung Galaxy S4 phone. And the original first version that was migrated to Chromium was based on Chromium 18. Then in 2014, the next major version launched with the Galaxy S5 phone, and with the Chromium upgrade again. In version 3, this is when things started to get very interesting, because we had our first version that launched on the Play Store. So it became an evergreen browser at that point, and you could get updates via the App Store, as well as previously just with firmware updates. And this launched on the Galaxy S6. And then at that point in time, when I'd had the message, it was 2016, and we'd recently launched, they had recently launched on the S7 with version 4. And this was the first version to have support for progressive web apps with service worker and push notification support. And so I put myself forward for the interview, and I managed to get the interview, and it was with Daniel Appelquist, who some of you may know as Torgo. And I'd actually met Daniel a few years before that in London, back when he was working at Telefonica, and he was collaborating with Mozilla. And he let me know that Samsung Internet is probably the biggest browser you've never heard of, with, and this sounds quite stunning, doesn't it? Around 400 million estimated active users. And I learnt that Samsung were hoping to be good web citizens and to start reaching out more to developers and to contribute to web standards and generally be good. Daniel had already started working with Samsung Internet as a contractor for a few months before that, and he'd already started to ramp up some of the external activities that they were doing, including in June of 2016, going to the PWA Dev Summit in Amsterdam. And he joined there our colleague Jung Ki Song, who is one of the editors of the service worker spec. And it was great that they were there because it shared that, unlike some tech publications might have you believe, progressive web apps aren't just a Google thing, and there are other browsers involved as well. And they were joined on stage by Google, Mozilla, Microsoft, and Opera. So Daniel was forming a brand new team called Web Advocacy. And at this point, I was quite keen to join. And thankfully, as you might have guessed, I got the job. Yes. And I learned just before I started that I would be joining 1 week after she had started Ada Rose Edwards, who some of you may know as Lady Ada King. And we were also joined shortly afterwards by Diego Gonzalez, who was just completing his PhD in stereoscopic user interfaces. And we're based in the lovely Staines, UK. Anyone know who that character is? Yeah, we're in the home of Ali G. But we're also, of course, an international team. After a couple of months, we were fortunate to get to visit the headquarters of Samsung in Suwon in South Korea, and we met many of our colleagues there. And that's where the majority of the engineering work goes on into the browser. And we also there met up with some of our colleagues from SRA, Samsung Research America, who are based on the East Coast in Boston and San Jose on the West Coast. We also have an engineering team in Bangalore too. So we started getting to work, but we quickly realized that we did actually have a bit of a mountain to climb. Partly because, as you've all seen from your hands raised earlier as well, the majority of developers are not aware of Samsung Internet's existence. This was actually from my own Twitter poll, so the audience skew was quite biased here, but even with 760 votes, only just over a third of people were aware of Samsung Internet. So clearly I need to get better at tweeting. And we genuinely had this from at least a couple of users. We heard reports that they went, hang on, I thought that was Internet Explorer. It was also very hard to find out what the market share of the browser was at the time, especially if you look at Google Analytics. You might not know that a non-trivial percentage of what's called Google Chrome is actually Samsung Internet Browser. And also at that time, it wasn't on Can I Use, so it was hard to find out what features were supported. And when developers did find out about the browser, they sometimes had a slightly angry response, and they said, oh no, I've got another browser to test now, and can't you just give up and just give us Chrome on its own? And worse than that, even because at the time we were only on Samsung devices, so quite rightly people would balk at the idea of having to get a Samsung device just to test Samsung Internet. At the time, and we still do now, we did have a remote test lab, so you could use a cloud-free device test lab service. But of course, that's not the same as having a real device. And we tried to make some headway with some things. I tried to create a Samsung Internet tag on Stack Overflow because I thought it would be good to answer people's questions on there. And that got soundly rejected by the community. I actually deleted this when it got down to -10 because I couldn't face seeing the number go down anymore. And we also tried to write a very balanced, neutral article for Wikipedia just as an overview, and it got rejected by the moderators for sounding like an advert. We also had the small matter of a little device called the Galaxy Note 7, which you might have heard about. Yes. At that point, we could have been sad pandas, but instead, we thought we'd better roll on, and we started to get some wins. And one of the first win was that StatCounter, from speaking with Daniel, added Samsung Internet Browser to their market share stats. And this showed that Samsung Internet had 10% share in Europe of all mobile browsing, and it was the number 3 browser after Chrome and Safari. Also worldwide, they have it as the number 4 mobile browser with about 7% market share. So not insignificant at all. And from that, another developer actually picked up on this market share and suggested to Can I Use that they should probably add Samsung Internet there. And thankfully, it was added then in July 2016. A little known tip, though, if you haven't seen it in Can I Use, you need to click the little Show All button and then scroll all the way over to the right, and then you'll find it. Also, it was added to HTML5test.com around the same time as a major mobile browser there. And yay, Daniel had a friend at Wikipedia, so we spoke to them and they helped us to get our article published, which is not an advert, I promise. Oh, and another user created a Samsung browser tag on Stack Overflow, and it hasn't been deleted yet, so just don't tell any of the moderators, and hopefully it will stay there. And of course, also we monitor mentions without the tag as well. We created a GitHub issues repository for collecting bugs and support questions from developers, and that's up there on GitHub/Samsung Internet. This does mean that we have a separate repository from, unfortunately, we have an internal bug tracking system as well. So at some point, it would be nice to combine those and to make some of our internal bug tracking more open as well. But this is still really useful. And we started to write and share guides and introductory guides for developers to, well, first of all, start sharing what the web browser is and how to start developing around it, including how to remote debug it. And thankfully, that's pretty easy because all you need to do is set up your phone in developer mode and to enable USB debugging. And then you should be able to see it in Chrome Inspect and use Chrome DevTools to debug it just like you would with Chrome. We created a developer hub as well so that we could share documentation about features and share our latest news, and that's at samsunginter.net, because we like short domain names. We collaborated with PPK as well, Peter Paul Koch, who you might know, and he wrote an article with us for Smashing Magazine. And it was an interview with Junkie Song, and this was a really good way to start sharing the news with some more developers and to share what was up with it. And we started to travel the world, Europe and further afield, to do things like this. And generally speaking, we go and talk about web technologies, and we talk about some of the web technologies that are new in Samsung Internet. But we're also spreading the word about Samsung Internet. And I was pleased to be able to add Copenhagen to that map just earlier. Thank you. We started making demos as well. This was one that I made called Snap What, and you can add emojis and scribble on top of your selfies or other pictures, or even your live feed camera with Get User Media, and then share those with your friends. And that's a progressive web app. Ada also has made loads of demos, and this one I particularly like is called Metaverse, and it's a shared web VR experience for lots of people all to join simultaneously and then be able to see other avatars of other people. And I think at CSS Day conference, she had nearly 200 people all using this simultaneously, and it didn't break. And it's using WebSockets. Diego also has been making loads of demos, and this one I particularly like called Bubble, which lets you view your 360-degree photos and easily share them with other people. So at this point, we were slightly happier pandas, and we were starting to bite off some of those early challenges. But still, the first question we would get from developers, and still now, is why? Why is Samsung developing their own browser? So, first of all, we don't want to just be a hardware company, because we think that the best user experiences can come from combining hardware and software, and this unlocks potential. So, for example, we have integration with the Gear VR headset. If you're viewing a web page on Samsung Internet on your phone, and then you slot it in the Gear VR headset, then automatically that same page will then load up in the Gear VR web browser, Samsung Internet for Gear VR. Also, we integrate with the fingerprint sensor and the iris scanner on the newer models. So you can use this to quickly log into websites again. It saves your password, and then you just use your fingerprint or iris scan to re-log into those websites. This is also useful for web payments, because you can use it to confirm your payment. So any website that uses the payment request API, you can have your card details and your shipping details remembered in the browser, and then just confirm with your biometrics, and then you can pay for it. This is an example, hopefully, of how we can put user experience first, and thankfully we're in the fortunate position of being able to do that at Samsung Internet. Also, it's a good long-term strategy for Samsung to be involved in web standards. We don't want to just be a passenger or get left behind on the side of the road as web technologies are advancing and moving forwards. It's good to have a driving seat there so we can have a say in web standards and we can help to try to push the web forwards. So we're involved in lots of W3C working groups and community groups like service workers, WebVR, Web Bluetooth, and Web Payments. And we contribute into Chromium. So you all probably know that Google contribute into Chromium, the open source project that Chrome is based on. But you might not know that other organizations do too, like Samsung and Intel and Adobe and Opera. And there's a lot of these browsers, and there seems to have been a whole wave of them in the last few years. PPK, because he knows his Latin plurals, called this the rise of the Chromia. So Opera, you might know, a few years ago also moved over to Chromium and Blink. There's UC browser with the orange squirrel there, which is the browser that originated in China, and that's actually the number 4 highest ranking browser in StatCounter. There's Yandex also, that has a very large market share in Russia in particular, and other locations. And there are also browsers that are on desktop as well, like Brave and Vivaldi. At this point, we were starting to write lots of blog posts, and some of them seemed to really resonate, which was good. And one of those was, think you know the top web browsers, which is about looking at some of the stats around market share and pointing out that actually many of the browsers, the standard typical browsers that we see often, in the logos on slides at conferences and things like that, present company accepted, the same old browsers that we've been sharing about and know about for years, from back in the desktop world, even before we had this massive migration over to mobile in the last decade. And so I shared about how actually it's a good idea to look at the data and maybe try to apply your thinking a bit more to real market share. So it can be a little bit scary, though, to think about all these other browsers that we might not have thought about. But I wrote this other post called "Because Browser Diversity is Good for the Web." And firstly, it talks about this, as we were mentioning earlier, that it's as a burden to test in other browsers, but at least these browsers are all aligned by web standards. So if you are using web standards and you're using progressive enhancement, then hopefully you shouldn't go too far wrong, and these browsers will have your back. And also, some of these browsers might be very popular in different locations around the world, and you might not know many people around you that use them, but actually you don't know where your next customers might come from. They might come from anywhere around the world, so it's worth knowing what browsers people use in different locations. Also, at this point, I should say that there's been some debate that I've had with people after posting this about whether it's good for browser diversity to have browsers contributing to the same engine, i.e. Blink, or other rendering engines. And my feeling is that it's good to have browser engine diversity as well, but it's not the only thing, and I think it's good to also to have browsers that are contributing to web standards, contributing into open source Chromium project, and contributing ideas and features to the web. And diversity, not just of browsers, but of people in technology, is one of our big themes as well, and it's something we write a lot about and we try to support through the events that we participate in. So thank you very much to all the ColdFront organizers for their efforts. So then, in late last year, we had our first beta. We decided to take baby steps to get there, though. So initially, we had it open to anyone, but you had to just apply and give us your Google ID so we could add you on the Play Store, so it wasn't actually listed for anyone who hadn't been granted access. But that was our first beta. And with version 5, we upgraded to Chromium 51. And then soon after, the next month, we had that stable version starting to ship out to Samsung Galaxy devices. Then March of this year, we had some exciting news. We had the first open beta on Play Store, so you didn't have to apply for it anymore. You could just go on the Play Store and download it. And this was the first version to support non-Samsung devices. So if you had a Pixel or a Nexus phone, you could also download it, GED devices. Then a couple of months after that, we had that version launch as stable on the S8 phone, and then soon after to all the other support devices, including the GED devices. With version 5.4, we introduced PWA ambient badging. So when you were viewing a PWA in Samsung Internet, the usual star bookmark icon on the left of the URL bar actually dynamically switches to a plus icon. So you can tap that and then easily add that PWA to your home screen. Also, in version 5.4, we introduced support for DeX, which is another little bit of Samsung hardware. DeX is a little dock that you plug your phone into, and you can plug a keyboard and a monitor into it, and it turns your phone into a desktop experience. And so then we had an actual desktop version of Samsung Internet Browser as well. And we have the same PWA functionality there as well. So you can press the plus icon and save it to home screen, which is actually your desktop in this case. You get a little desktop icon, and then you can load it up from there, and it launches in a standalone window without the URL bar. Around this time also, Diego submitted an entry for the unofficial Progressive Web App Community Approved Logo competition and managed to win. So if you're looking for a logo for PWAs, you can find it there, and it's designed to be customized, so you can use your own colors and design around it as you like. Also, he made this Panda logo here. In case you're wondering about the panda thing, yeah, pandas are just our kind of unofficial animal mascot, like Firefox has the fox. And so in this particular case, the panda's looking quite scary there because he's designed to, fight with this big, scary Mozilla VR dinosaur, but in a friendly fight. And Brave browser is their mascot is a lion, and so we have Twitter GIF fights, and I managed to win the last Twitter GIF fight with this one. Then just last month, we had more exciting news. We launched our version 6 in beta, and this, for the first time, is available for all Android L+ phones. So if you've got Android 5.0 onwards, then you should be able to download it from the Play Store. And this one is based on Chromium version 56. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll just run through it quickly now. We have major releases twice per year with a beta, then the flagship phone launch, and then it gets released to everyone else. And then aside from that, we have minor updates, which are not the Chromium engine upgrades, but more like smaller features and fixes and things that we need to put in. In our latest version 6.2, we introduced support for CSS Grid, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. And this is an example of the two-way nature of developer advocacy. So we don't just communicate from engineering out into web developers, but we gather feedback from you all to pass back to our engineering product teams. And so we knew that CSS Grid was a big deal that people want to see in all browsers. So we pitched this strongly internally, and even though actually this was introduced in Chromium 57, we were able to backport it into the version in our latest browser, which is something we can do when it's important. And we've been really pleased with the reaction to the latest browser. Actually, ZDNet said it's Android's best mobile browser. And the reaction from the public has been really nice as well, saying awesome browser, it's fast with content blockers enabled, and really fast and smooth. We've got 4.6 stars on the Play Store, which is pretty good. Engadget, though, slightly spoilt the mood with their piece that said Samsung inexplicably opens up its Android browser, another app nobody asked for. But even they said it has its charms, right? And you can't please everybody. And Google Analytics, they've promised they're going to add Samsung Internet soon. So have a look out for it in your logs. Hopefully you'll see it soon. So at this point, we're kind of happy at Pandas. We're dancing around. Things are getting better. But we know that there's still a lot of work to do. if you're interested in some of the things that are coming up next, a good way is to have a look at our flags, so the experimental features that are behind flags. So in Samsung Internet, it's internet://flags. And here you will find in our latest version things like Web Bluetooth, Web VR, which we already have support for in the Gear VR browser, but this brings support to the mobile, so for other headsets as well, and WebGL2, gamepad extensions, and more. Oh no, never mind. You just have to imagine this one. This was to share that I'm particularly excited about the Web Bluetooth support that we've just introduced, because I have a demo that I've made that you can control a Parrot mini drone with your browser, and this was going to show a GIF of it doing flips and things. Just imagine a really cool demo, and that's what would have been on this slide. And I'm excited in general about this future of the web that's going from, as Brett Victor called it, pictures under glass, where we're kind of stabbing at things under a touchscreen or with a mouse, and actually breaking out from those screens and breaking out into the physical world around us with physical web and Web Bluetooth, and breaking out into virtual reality, mixed reality, and the metaverse around us. And I'm excited about this idea of browsers going far beyond what we just think of as browsing. Samsung Internet, we touched on the name earlier. We have actually had lots of conversations on and off about rebranding, but we are going to stick with it for now. So for one thing, it's quite useful for all those non-technical users who just want to go to visit a website and they want a big button that says Internet. Hey, that's what we give them, so it's quite useful for that at least. And here we've got a nice shiny new logo now. Our team is expanding as well. We recently had Yuv join us on a 6-month internship, and we've got another mystery member joining us next month. And, don't know why that is. I must have not pushed it to the website properly. Anyway, and Yuv has been really good about creating beginner's guides, especially. He's been using that journey he's been taking himself of learning about progressive web apps, about service workers, and documenting that and sharing that with other developers on our blog. So are we going to continue to do that, to share guides, especially for beginners, but also for other, more advanced developers? We're going to continue to promote diversity in technology, write lots of documentation and better documentation than we have now, and more demos, and we want to write more tools that can help you as web developers too. And to keep advocating the web, evangelizing new web technologies, and gathering feedback from you all as well. And the not so subtle hidden message there, PWA, is to also signify that we're keen to keep improving the experience around progressive web apps as well. And so I mentioned earlier that we're speaking with Google about Web APK and things like that for the future. And this should be a lot bigger, but anyway. we also are keen to continue to try living up to our unofficial team motto, which is make the web better. Pandas waving there would have been. That's the story of Samsung Internet so far. If you'd like, you can give some anonymous feedback about it at that URL. You can badger us on Twitter and other social media if you have questions, or find me afterwards, or I'll be on the panel. And thank you very much for listening.